I walked into my sister Sarah's living room, expecting comfort and support just 1 week after burying my husband David. Instead, I found myself staring at a room full of family members as Sarah stood holding her 1-year-old son Tyler, announcing with a cold smile, "Tyler is David's child, and according to his will, I'm entitled to half of your $920,000 house." She waved an official-looking document in the air, while everyone gasped. I bit my lip hard, trying to contain my laughter, because I knew something that made her claim absolutely impossible. The birthday decorations seemed grotesque now, balloons and streamers mocking the gravity of what Sarah had just announced. Tyler babbled innocently in her arms, unaware that his first birthday party had just become the stage for what felt like my public execution. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the shocked murmurs of our cousins, aunts, and uncles who had gathered to celebrate Tyler's milestone. Sarah's expression was triumphant, almost gleeful, as she handed the document to our cousin Mark. "Read it aloud," she commanded, her voice steady and rehearsed. "I want everyone to hear this." Mark's face went pale as he scanned the pages. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "This appears to be David's last will and testament, dated 6 months before his death. It states that if David Richardson had any biological children outside of his marriage to Joanna Richardson, those children would inherit 50% of all marital assets, including the family home." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. My Aunt Linda clutched her pearls, while my Uncle Frank shook his head in disbelief. I felt like I was watching this scene unfold from outside my body, like I was floating above the chaos, observing my own life imploding. "Show them Tyler's birth certificate," Sarah continued, producing another document from what appeared to be a carefully organized folder. "Born 11 months ago. Do the math." My mind raced backward to that time period. 11 months ago, David and I had been going through a rough patch. We were struggling with infertility, and the constant doctor visits and failed treatments had put strain on our marriage. I remembered David working late more often, coming home exhausted and distant. But an affair with my own sister? It seemed impossible. "Sarah, this is insane," I said, finding my voice. "David would never. With you, of all people, wouldn't he?" Sarah's voice dripped with venom. "When you were so wrapped up in your own problems, constantly crying about babies, making his life miserable with your neediness. I was there for him, Joanna. I listened to him. I gave him what you couldn't." The words hit me like physical blows. Several family members shifted uncomfortably, unsure whose side to take. My cousin Jenny, who had always been close to me, looked horrified. But I noticed my Uncle Frank nodding slightly, as if Sarah's explanation made sense to him. "The will is witnessed and notarized," Sarah continued, her confidence growing with each word. "David came to me after Tyler was born, confessed everything, and had this will drawn up to make sure his son was provided for. He felt guilty about the affair, but he knew Tyler deserved his inheritance." I examined the document with shaking hands. The signature looked like David's flowing handwriting. The witnesses were names I recognized but didn't know personally. The notary stamp appeared legitimate. My heart sank as the legal reality began to settle in. "I need time to process this," I said weakly. "Time for what?" Sarah snapped. "To hide assets? To contest a legal document? Tyler is David's son, which makes him heir to half of everything David owned, including that house you're living in so comfortably. The house David and I had bought together 5 years ago, where we had planned to raise our own children, where every room held memories of our life together. The thought of losing it, of sharing it with Sarah after what she was claiming, made me feel physically sick. "Sarah has every right to claim Tyler's inheritance," our Aunt Margaret said, speaking up for the first time. "A child shouldn't suffer because of adult mistakes." "But we don't even know if this is true," Jenny protested. "Sarah, this is a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, it's a fact," Sarah replied coldly. "And I've already consulted with a lawyer. This will is legally binding, and if Joanna tries to fight it, I'll take her to court and expose everything David did." "Is that what you want, Joanna? Your husband's reputation dragged through a public legal battle? The threat hung in the air like smoke. David had been beloved in our community, respected at work, admired for his kindness and integrity. The thought of his memory being tainted by scandal made my chest tight with anxiety. Tyler started fussing, and Sarah bounced him gently, playing the role of devoted mother. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said, her voice softening for effect. "But Tyler deserves his father's legacy. David would have wanted his son to be taken care of." As I looked around the room at the faces of my family members, I saw confusion, sympathy for Tyler, and growing acceptance of Sarah's story. The careful way she had planned this announcement, choosing Tyler's birthday party when everyone would be present, having all her documents ready, even the emotional manipulation about David's reputation, it was all calculated. But something deep in my gut told me this was wrong. David and I may have had problems, but the man I married for 8 years, the man who cried when we got negative pregnancy tests, the man who held me every night when I felt broken, that man would never have betrayed me with my own sister. However, as I stood there holding what appeared to be his legal signature on a document that could cost me everything, I realized that believing in David's character wasn't going to be enough. Sarah had come prepared for war, and I had walked into this battle completely defenseless. 3 days later, I sat across from Brian Summers, the estate attorney who had helped David and me with our wills and house purchase. His usually warm demeanor was replaced with professional concern as he studied the documents Sarah had presented. "Joanna, I have to be honest with you," Brian said, setting the will down on his mahogany desk. "This appears to be legitimate. The witnesses are real people. The notary is licensed in this state, and the language follows proper legal formatting for testamentary documents." My heart sank further into my stomach. "But Brian, you handled our estate planning. David never mentioned wanting to change his will." "That's what concerns me most," Brian admitted. "David was meticulous about legal matters. If he had wanted to modify his will, he would have come to me, or at least informed me of changes made elsewhere. This document creates a significant conflict with the will I have on file, which leaves everything to you. So what does that mean? It means we have 2 wills with different instructions, and without clear evidence of which one supersedes the other, a court would likely order genetic testing to determine if the claimed biological relationship exists." Before I could respond, Brian's secretary knocked and announced that Margaret Steinberg, Sarah's attorney, had arrived with papers requiring my immediate attention. Margaret Steinberg looked like she had stepped out of a legal thriller. Sharp suit, briefcase, and an expression that suggested she ate opposing parties for breakfast. She placed a stack of documents on Brian's desk, with the confidence of someone who held all the winning cards. "Miss Richardson," she said, addressing me with cold formality, "my client is prepared to proceed with genetic testing to establish paternity. Given the substantial assets involved, we're requesting expedited processing." "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then we'll petition the court to compel testing," Margaret replied smoothly. "But that would only delay the inevitable and increase legal costs for everyone involved." Brian reviewed Margaret's paperwork. "They're also requesting a temporary restraining order to prevent you from selling, transferring, or encumbering any marital assets until paternity is established." The walls of Brian's office felt like they were closing in on me. In less than a week, I had gone from grieving widow to potential defendant in a legal battle that could cost me my home, my financial security, and my husband's reputation. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "My client is concerned about the timeline for resolution. She has a 1-year-old child to support and is currently staying in temporary housing. If paternity is confirmed, she would need immediate access to the residential property to ensure proper living conditions for the child." "You're talking about my home," I said, my voice rising. "The home I shared with my husband for 5 years. The home that may legally belong 50% to my client's son," Margaret corrected. "We're not trying to be unreasonable, Miss Richardson, but a child's welfare takes priority." After Margaret left, Brian and I sat in heavy silence. Finally, he spoke. Joanna, I've known you and David for years. This doesn't feel right to me either. But from a legal standpoint, if that DNA test comes back positive, Sarah will have a very strong case. How strong? Strong enough that I'd recommend settlement rather than litigation. Fighting this in court would be expensive, time-consuming, and public. Even if you won on technical grounds, the damage to David's memory and your own emotional well-being could be devastating. I spent the rest of that week in a fog of disbelief and growing anxiety. Sarah had moved into my guest room, claiming it was temporary until the legal situation was resolved, but her presence felt like an invasion. She had brought Tyler's crib, toys, and what seemed like half of a nursery into my space. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of Tyler crying and Sarah moving around my kitchen like she owned it. She had even rearranged my refrigerator to accommodate baby food and formula. I hope you don't mind, she said one morning, finding me staring at my transformed living space. Tyler needs routine, and this arrangement works better for everyone. This is temporary, Sarah, I reminded her, though my voice lacked conviction. Of course, she agreed, but something in her tone suggested she had different plans. The phone calls started that afternoon. First, my Aunt Linda called to express her support for doing right by Tyler. Then my cousin Mark called to suggest I think about what David would have wanted. By evening, I had received 6 calls from family members, all expressing variations of the same message. Tyler was innocent, David was gone, and I should accept the situation gracefully. My friend Jessica was the only person who seemed to share my doubts. She came over that evening, taking in the chaos of baby equipment and Sarah's belongings scattered throughout my home. This is insane, Joanna, Jessica whispered as we stood in my backyard, away from Sarah's ears. The timing, the dramatic announcement, the perfectly prepared documents. It's all too convenient. But what if it's true? I asked. What if David really did have an affair with her? Then he would have told you, Jessica said firmly. The David I knew was honest to a fault. Remember when he accidentally got $20 too much change at the grocery store and drove back to return it? That man doesn't keep secrets about fathering children. That night, unable to sleep with Tyler crying down the hall and Sarah humming lullabies, I found myself going through David's personal effects for the 100th time since his death. His phone, his wallet, his dresser drawers, looking for any clue that might explain this nightmare. In the back of his sock drawer, I found a cell phone I had never seen before. It was an older model, completely dead. When I plugged it in to charge, my hands were shaking. If David had been having an affair, if he had been living a double life, this phone might contain the evidence. But as I stared at the black screen waiting for it to power up, I realized I was terrified of what I might find. Either this phone would prove David's innocence, or it would confirm that the man I loved and mourned had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The genetic testing was scheduled for the following Monday. In 3 days, I would have scientific proof of whether Tyler was David's biological child. But as I sat in my darkened bedroom, listening to Sarah singing softly to a baby who might be my husband's son, I wondered if the truth would set me free or destroy what remained of my world. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. The genetic testing clinic was sterile and efficient, a place where family secrets were reduced to cotton swabs and laboratory analysis. I watched as the technician gently swabbed the inside of Tyler's cheek while Sarah held him securely. Results will be available by Thursday, the technician informed us. We'll call both parties as soon as the analysis is complete. The next 3 days felt like living in suspended animation. Sarah continued treating my home like her own, even going so far as to host a playdate for Tyler with some neighbor children. I came home from grocery shopping to find strange women in my living room, cooing over Tyler while Sarah played the gracious hostess. I hope you don't mind, she said when I appeared in the doorway. Tyler needs social interaction with other children his age. I minded everything about this situation, but I felt powerless to object. What if Tyler really was David's son? What right did I have to deny him a normal childhood while we sorted out legal complications? Thursday afternoon, my phone rang while I was sitting in my office trying to focus on work. Brian's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach dropped. "Joanna, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Can you come to my office immediately?" The drive to Brian's office felt like traveling to my own execution. Every red light seemed to last forever. Every turn brought me closer to news that could change everything. "The DNA results confirm a biological relationship," Brian said as soon as I sat down. "Tyler shares genetic markers consistent with being David's biological son." The room started spinning. Even though I had mentally prepared for this possibility, hearing the scientific confirmation felt like being hit by a truck. David had betrayed me. David had fathered a child with my sister. David had lived a lie for over a year before his death. "I'm so sorry, Joanna," Brian continued. "I know how difficult this must be." Margaret Steinberg wasted no time capitalizing on the results. By Friday morning, she had filed papers claiming Tyler's inheritance rights and demanding immediate resolution of property division. Sarah's demeanor shifted from apologetically accommodating to righteously demanding. "Now that we know the truth," Sarah announced over breakfast, "we need to discuss practical arrangements. Tyler and I will need more space. And frankly, this house is perfect for raising a child." "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "You could move into a nice apartment," Sarah said, as if she were offering me a generous gift. "I'll buy out your half of the house at current market value. It makes the most sense for everyone." "This is my home, Sarah. David and I built our life here." "David built a life with me too," Sarah replied coldly. "And his son deserves to grow up in his father's house." That afternoon, Sarah's transformation became complete. She invited Margaret Steinberg to the house for a strategy meeting, spreading legal documents across my dining room table as if it were her war room. "Based on the DNA confirmation," Margaret explained, "Tyler is entitled to 50% of all marital assets. The house, David's retirement accounts, his life insurance policy, his car, everything." "Life insurance policy?" I asked. David's life insurance was something I had been grateful for during this difficult time, a financial safety net that would help me rebuild my life. $200,000, Margaret confirmed. As Tyler's legal guardian, Sarah would manage his portion until he reaches majority. I felt physically sick. Sarah wasn't just claiming David's attention and love. She was systematically dismantling every aspect of the life David and I had built together. "I'll need access to all financial records," Sarah added. "Bank statements, investment accounts, property taxes. I want to make sure Tyler gets everything he's entitled to." The next few days brought a parade of humiliations. Sarah hired a moving company to bring more of her belongings into the house. She changed Tyler's pediatrician to one closer to our neighborhood. She even had new house keys made, explaining that she needed secure access to Tyler's home. Family members who had initially expressed sympathy for my situation gradually shifted their support towards Sarah. After all, she was now the mother of David's only child, and Tyler's welfare took priority over my feelings. "You have to understand," my Aunt Linda explained during a painful phone conversation. "Tyler is David's legacy. Sarah is just protecting her son's interests." "What about my interests?" I asked. "I was married to David for 8 years, and Sarah is the mother of his child," Linda replied gently but firmly. "That's a bond that lasts forever." Jessica remained my only ally, but even she was struggling with the DNA evidence. "I still think something's not right about this," she insisted during one of our late-night conversations. "But Joanna, the test results don't lie. Tyler really is related to David genetically." "Then David lied to me for over a year," I said, the words tasting bitter. "He looked me in the eye every day knowing he had fathered a child with my sister." "Maybe he was trying to find the right way to tell you," Jessica suggested weakly. "But I knew better. The David I married would have told me immediately, would have confessed his mistake and begged for forgiveness. The fact that he had died without revealing the truth meant either he was a completely different person than I thought, or something else was happening that I couldn't understand. Sarah's lawyer delivered an ultimatum on the following Monday. Either I agreed to sell the house and divide all assets within 30 days, or they would file a formal lawsuit that would make everything public record. Think about what David would want, Margaret said during the meeting in my living room. A meeting held in my own home without my permission. Would he want his memory dragged through a public legal battle? Would he want Tyler to grow up, knowing his inheritance was obtained through a nasty court fight? As I looked around my living room, now filled with Tyler's toys, Sarah's belongings, and legal documents that could strip away everything I had left of my marriage, I realized I was completely defeated. The DNA test had confirmed Tyler's biological connection to David. The will appeared legitimate. My own family was pressuring me to accept Sarah's claims. But that night, as I lay in my bed listening to Tyler cry, and Sarah comforting him in the room that used to be David's office, I made a decision. Even if I had to give up everything, even if David had betrayed me in the worst possible way, I needed to understand how this had happened. I was going to find out the truth about David and Sarah's relationship, not because it would change the legal reality, but because I needed to know who my husband really was before I lost everything that remained of our life together. Sarah's confidence grew exponentially after the DNA results. What had started as tentative claims backed by legal documents evolved into complete ownership of the narrative surrounding David's alleged affair. I should probably tell you how it really started, Sarah said one morning as we sat in my kitchen, or what felt increasingly like her kitchen. Tyler played with blocks on the floor, while Sarah spoke with the casual air of someone discussing weekend plans. David was so unhappy, Joanna. You were obsessed with fertility treatments, always crying, always making everything about your problems. He needed someone who could make him feel like a man again. I gripped my coffee cup tighter, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. It began innocently, Sarah continued, clearly enjoying my discomfort. He started calling me after particularly difficult days with you. I was a good listener. I understood what he was going through. And you decided to seduce him? I didn't seduce anyone, Sarah snapped. David pursued me. He said he felt more comfortable with me than he had with anyone in years. He said I reminded him why he used to be happy. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Whether true or fabricated, Sarah's story was designed to cause maximum emotional damage. That afternoon, Sarah produced another folder of evidence. Photographs of her and David together at various locations around town. Love letters written in David's distinctive handwriting. Even receipts from restaurants where they had allegedly met for romantic dinners. I kept everything, Sarah explained to Margaret Steinberg and Brian during yet another meeting in my living room. David was planning to leave Joanna after Tyler was born. He wanted to be a real father to his son. The photographs were devastating. David and Sarah laughing together outside a coffee shop. David's arm around Sarah's shoulders at what appeared to be a park. David looking lovingly at Sarah as she held baby Tyler in what seemed to be a hospital room. When were these taken? Brian asked, examining the photos with a magnifying glass. Over the past year and a half, Sarah replied. David documented our relationship carefully. He said someday Tyler would want to understand how his parents fell in love. I studied the images, looking for any sign they were manipulated or staged, but David appeared relaxed and genuinely happy in ways I hadn't seen during the final year of our marriage. And the letters? Margaret prompted. Sarah handed over a stack of handwritten notes, each one more intimate than the last. David's handwriting expressing love for Sarah, excitement about becoming Tyler's father, and guilt about deceiving me. My dearest Sarah, Brian read aloud from one letter. Every day I spend with Joanna feels like living a lie. You and Tyler are my real family now. I just need more time to figure out how to make this transition without destroying everyone involved. The letters were dated throughout the year leading up to David's death. If authentic, they painted a picture of a man desperately unhappy in his marriage and planning to abandon me for my sister. There's something else, Sarah said, producing her final piece of evidence. David's life insurance policy lists Tyler as a beneficiary. She handed Margaret a document from David's employer showing that he had indeed added Tyler Richardson Chen to his life insurance policy 6 months before his death. Wait, I said, studying the document. Tyler's last name here is Richardson Chen, not just Richardson. David wanted Tyler to carry both family names, Sarah explained smoothly. He was proud of his heritage and wanted his son to honor both sides of his family. But something about the hyphenated name bothered me. Chen wasn't Sarah's last name. It was our neighbor Michael Chen's last name. Why would David choose that particular combination? I don't understand the Chen connection, Brian said, echoing my confusion. David chose it because it sounded distinguished, Sarah replied quickly. He thought Tyler Richardson Chen sounded more sophisticated than Tyler Richardson Williams. Her explanation felt rehearsed, but Margaret seemed satisfied with the documentation. Between the photographs, letters, life insurance modification, and DNA confirmation, Sarah's case appeared ironclad. I think we should schedule a meeting with a family mediator, Margaret suggested. Given the overwhelming evidence, litigation would be unnecessarily costly and emotionally damaging for everyone involved. What about my rights as David's wife? I asked, desperately. You'll receive your fair share, Margaret assured me. But Tyler's rights as David's biological son take legal precedence in inheritance matters. That evening, Sarah made her expectations crystal clear. She had researched comparable apartments in the area and prepared a list of places where I could relocate within 30 days. This one looks nice, she said, showing me a listing for a 2-bedroom apartment 15 minutes away. It's much more appropriate for a single woman, and the rent is reasonable. I'm not ready to move out of my home, I said. It's not your home anymore, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. It's Tyler's home. David left it to his son, and as Tyler's mother, I'm responsible for providing him with appropriate living conditions. Sarah, even if everything you're claiming is true, I still legally own 50% of this house, which I'm prepared to buy from you at current market value, Sarah countered. $460,000 is more than generous. I realized Sarah had calculated everything down to the dollar. She knew exactly what my half was worth, had researched housing alternatives for me, and had planned my complete removal from David's life. Jessica visited that weekend and was appalled by the situation's progression. She's moving awfully fast for someone who just wants Tyler's inheritance protected, Jessica observed quietly as we walked through my neighborhood, possibly for one of the last times. What choice do I have? I asked. The DNA test confirms Tyler is biologically related to David. The will appears legitimate. Sarah has photographs and love letters. It's just odd, Jessica persisted. How did she document everything so perfectly? Most affairs are secretive, but Sarah has proof of every encounter. Maybe David wanted evidence, in case he decided to leave me officially. Or maybe someone else wanted evidence for different reasons, Jessica said cryptically. What do you mean? I mean, this whole situation benefits Sarah enormously. She gets a house, money, family support, and complete control over Tyler's inheritance. It's almost like she planned it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Jessica's words kept echoing in my mind. Sarah had gained everything from this situation. Financial security, a beautiful home, social status as the mother of David's child, and the sympathy of our entire family. But if Sarah had planned this, how had she manipulated a DNA test? How had she forged David's handwriting so perfectly? How had she created photographs that looked completely authentic? As I lay in bed listening to Sarah singing lullabies to Tyler, I realized that either my husband had been living an elaborate double life that I was too blind to see, or my sister was orchestrating the most sophisticated fraud I could imagine. Both possibilities terrified me, but only one of them meant I still had a chance to save my marriage's memory and my own future. Saturday morning, I decided to go through David's childhood photos and family documents one more time. If I was going to lose everything, I wanted to understand the man I had married and mourned. David's mother had given me several boxes of family memorabilia after the funeral, and I had stored them in the basement without much examination. Grief had made the task too painful, but now I approached it with desperate determination. The first box contained report cards, school photos, and certificates from David's childhood. The second held family vacation pictures and holiday celebrations. But the third box stopped me cold. Among the high school graduation photos and college memories, I found pictures of David with another young man who looked exactly like him. Identical height, identical face, identical smile, but wearing different clothes and standing in different locations. My hands shaking, I pulled out photo after photo of David with his identical twin brother Michael, who had died in a car accident 3 years ago. David had mentioned Michael occasionally, always with sadness, but I had never realized how completely identical they were. In several photos, I couldn't tell which man was David and which was Michael. They were mirror images of each other, down to their facial expressions and posture. I found Michael's obituary tucked between family photos. Michael Richardson, age 29, died in a single car accident on Highway 12, survived by his twin brother David and parents Robert and Helen Richardson. The obituary was dated 3 years ago. Tyler was 1 year old now. My heart started racing as I did the math. If Tyler was conceived 11 months ago, and Michael had died 3 years ago, there was a 2-year gap. But genetic testing couldn't distinguish between identical twins. They shared the same DNA profile. I frantically searched through more photos, looking for any pictures of Michael from the time period before Tyler's birth. In a college album, I found photos labeled with names and dates in David's mother's handwriting. David and Michael. Spring break senior year. Michael's graduation party. David and Michael at cousin Lisa's wedding. But as I studied the photos more carefully, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In several pictures from what appeared to be recent years, the man I had assumed was David was wearing clothes I had never seen, standing in locations I didn't recognize. I found David's old cell phone and scrolled through his contact list. Michael Richardson was listed with a phone number and an address across town. I called the number, knowing it would probably be disconnected, but needing to try. The call went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Michael. Leave a message." The voice was identical to David's. I drove to the address listed for Michael in David's phone contacts. It was a small apartment complex in a neighborhood I rarely visited. The property manager confirmed that Michael Richardson had lived in Unit 12 until his death 3 years ago. Nice guy, the manager remembered. Quiet, kept to himself mostly. Had some woman visiting regularly during his last few months, though. "Do you remember anything about her?" "Blonde, pretty. Had a baby with her sometimes. Always thought it was strange she kept coming around after he died, asking about his personal effects. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely speak. After he died? Yeah, for months afterward. Said she was his girlfriend and wanted to collect his things. I told her his family had already taken everything, but she kept insisting there were items that belonged to her. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities that seemed impossible but were the only explanations that made sense. If Sarah had been involved with Michael before his death, if Tyler was Michael's child rather than David's, then the DNA test would still show a biological relationship, because identical twins share identical genetic markers. But I needed proof. That evening, I called Jessica and asked her to meet me urgently. We went through Michael's obituary together, researching the timeline of his death and Tyler's birth. If Tyler was conceived 11 months ago, but Michael died 3 years ago, the timing doesn't work, Jessica said. Unless Tyler is older than Sarah claims, I finished. Or unless Sarah was pregnant when Michael died and lied about Tyler's age. We searched social media for any trace of Sarah's relationship with Michael. Sarah's Facebook profile showed no relationship status changes during the relevant time period, but her photo history revealed something interesting. In pictures from 2.5 years ago, Sarah appeared to be pregnant. The photos were tagged at various locations around town, including several near Michael's apartment complex. "Look at this," Jessica said, pointing to a photo of Sarah at a coffee shop. The timestamp says this was taken 3 months before Michael's death, and she's clearly showing pregnancy. If Sarah had been pregnant with Michael's child and gave birth shortly before or after his death, Tyler would actually be about 2.5 years old, not 1 year old as she claimed. But how could she fake Tyler's age? I asked. Birth certificates can be modified, Jessica said grimly. And if she never registered Tyler immediately after birth, she could have manipulated the documentation later. We spent the next 2 hours researching everything we could find about Michael Richardson's life and death. I found his social media profiles, which Sarah had never mentioned knowing about. Michael's Instagram account showed regular photos with a woman who was clearly Sarah, dating back over 3 years. They appeared together at restaurants, parks, and family gatherings. In several photos, Sarah was visibly pregnant. The final photo on Michael's account was posted 2 weeks before his death. It showed Sarah holding a newborn baby with the caption, "My beautiful family." I screenshot everything and created a timeline. Sarah and Michael had been in a relationship for at least a year before his death. She had given birth to Tyler just weeks before Michael died in the car accident. After Michael's death, Sarah had apparently falsified Tyler's age and waited until David died to claim Tyler was David's son. The sophistication of the deception was staggering. Sarah had grieved privately for Michael while maintaining a normal relationship with our family. She had raised Tyler alone for over 2 years, waiting for the right moment to claim David's inheritance. She had forged documents, created fake photographs, and manipulated genetic testing by exploiting the biological reality of identical twins. But Joanna, Jessica said slowly, how did she forge David's handwriting so perfectly? How did she create those love letters and modify his life insurance policy? I thought about the life insurance document that had listed Tyler as Tyler Richardson Chen. The Chen part had bothered me because it seemed random, but now I realized it wasn't random at all. Michael must have dated someone named Chen before Sarah, I said. Or Sarah used that name to create false documentation. She's been planning this for years, Jessica. She probably studied David's handwriting, practiced forging his signature, and created evidence gradually over time. We need to take this to the police, Jessica said. This is fraud on a massive scale. But I hesitated. Sarah had been incredibly thorough in creating her false narrative. Would my discovered photos and timeline be enough to prove she had committed fraud? Or would it look like a desperate widow trying to deny genetic testing results? As I sat in my car outside Michael's former apartment complex, looking up at the window where Tyler had probably spent his first years of life, I realized I had found the truth that could save my home and David's memory. But proving that truth would require confronting Sarah with evidence she had spent over 2 years carefully concealing. I spent Sunday morning preparing for the most important conversation of my life. Jessica helped me organize all the evidence we had discovered. Michael's photos with Sarah, the timeline proving Tyler's real age, Michael's social media posts, and the apartment manager's statement about Sarah's visits after Michael's death. Are you sure you want to do this without Brian present? Jessica asked, as we spread everything across my dining room table. I need to see Sarah's reaction when I present this evidence, I replied. If she's been lying for over 2 years, she'll have responses prepared for legal challenges, but she might not be ready for what I've discovered. Sarah was in the living room with Tyler, reading him picture books and playing the role of devoted mother. I watched them for a moment, noting how comfortable Tyler seemed in the house that Sarah claimed was rightfully his. Sarah, I need to talk to you about something important, I said, keeping my voice steady. If this is about the mediation timeline, Margaret said we can be flexible with dates, Sarah replied without looking up from Tyler's book. It's about Michael. Sarah's entire body went rigid. She set down the book slowly and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Pure, calculating wariness. What about Michael? I laid out the first photograph on the coffee table. It was Michael's social media photo of Sarah holding newborn Tyler with the caption about his beautiful family. This photo was posted 2 weeks before Michael died, I said calmly. 3 years ago. Which would make Tyler 2.5 years old, not 1 year old. Sarah stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked up at me, with eyes that had gone completely cold. I don't know what you think you've discovered, Joanna, but you're grasping at straws. I laid out the timeline Jessica and I had constructed, showing Sarah's pregnancy photos from Michael's social media, the apartment manager's statement, and Tyler's real birth timeline. Tyler is Michael's son, not David's, I said. You lied about his age, forged David's will, and exploited the fact that identical twins shared DNA to manipulate genetic testing. Sarah was quiet for so long that Tyler started fussing. She picked him up automatically, but her eyes never left my face. Even if that were true, Sarah finally said, you can't prove anything. The DNA test confirmed Tyler's relationship to David. The will is legally valid. You're just a grieving widow who can't accept reality. Then explain this, I said, producing the next piece of evidence. David's medical records from his cancer treatment when he was 15. Sarah's confident expression faltered slightly. David was treated with chemotherapy that left him permanently sterile, I continued. He could never have fathered children. The fertility problems in our marriage weren't because of me. They were because David was incapable of having biological children. I handed Sarah the medical documentation Brian had helped me obtain. The oncology records clearly stated that David's cancer treatment had resulted in permanent infertility. You're lying, Sarah whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. The records are from Children's Hospital, I said. Brian confirmed their authenticity. David knew he was sterile, which is why he never told me about fertility problems during our marriage. He was protecting my feelings while we went through treatments he knew would never work. Tyler started crying, perhaps sensing the tension in the room. Sarah bounced him mechanically while staring at the medical records. I had backup DNA testing done, Sarah said desperately. I have proof Tyler is David's son. Show me, I challenged. Sarah disappeared into the guest room and returned with another folder. Inside was a DNA test report allegedly comparing Tyler's genetics to David's personal effects. This test was done before David died, Sarah claimed. I wanted to be sure before I told him about Tyler. I examined the document carefully. It appeared legitimate, but something about the formatting looked familiar. Sarah, this test report is dated after David's death, I said, pointing to the date stamp. And the sample collection shows David's toothbrush and hair from a brush. You collected these items from our bathroom after he died. That's not true, Sarah protested, but her voice was cracking. It doesn't matter anyway, I continued, because this test would show the same results as the first one. Michael and David had identical DNA. Any genetic material from David would match Tyler, if Tyler is Michael's son. Jessica chose that moment to join us in the living room. She had been monitoring the conversation from the kitchen, ready to serve as witness to whatever Sarah might admit. There's something else, Jessica said, producing her phone. I contacted the witnesses listed on David's will. Neither of them remembers signing any document for David. One of them was out of the country, during the date listed on the will. Sarah's carefully constructed facade was crumbling. She sat down heavily, still holding Tyler, and for the first time looked like the grieving mother she actually was, rather than the calculating manipulator she had become. Michael and I were going to get married, Sarah said quietly. We had been together for over a year when Tyler was born. Michael was so excited to be a father. What happened? I asked, my anger toward Sarah mixing with unexpected sympathy. The accident happened 2 weeks after Tyler was born, Sarah continued, tears starting to flow. 1 minute we were planning our wedding and Tyler's baptism, and the next minute Michael was gone, and I was alone with a newborn baby. So you decided to claim David as Tyler's father? Not immediately, Sarah admitted. I struggled for 2 years, working part-time jobs, living paycheck to paycheck. Tyler deserved better than that. He deserved the life Michael would have given him. But David wasn't Michael, I said. David had everything Michael should have had, Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger with justification. A good job, a beautiful house, a wife who loved him. When David died, I saw an opportunity to give Tyler the inheritance Michael never got the chance to provide. By destroying my life and David's memory, You would have been fine, Sarah said defensively. You have your job, your education, your friends. Tyler only had me, and I was failing him. Jessica and I exchanged glances. Sarah's confession was complete, but her justification revealed the depth of her desperation and grief. I need you to leave my house, I said firmly. I need you to publicly retract your claims about David, and I need you to face the legal consequences for fraud. And if I don't, then I'll file charges for forgery, fraud, perjury, and attempted theft, I replied. Tyler will end up in foster care while you serve time in prison. Sarah looked down at Tyler, who had fallen asleep in her arms despite the emotional turmoil surrounding him. Tyler is innocent in all this, she said quietly. Yes, he is, I agreed. Which is why I'm willing to help you figure out a solution that protects him while holding you accountable for what you've done. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had control over my own life again. The truth was finally exposed, but now I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be in the aftermath of Sarah's deception. The next morning, Brian arrived at my house with a forensic document expert who confirmed what I already knew. The will Sarah had presented was forged using David's signature from our tax returns. Every signature had been traced and modified to create false legal documents. Within hours, Margaret Steinberg withdrew from Sarah's case, citing conflicts that arose from new evidence. She later told Brian privately that she had suspected problems with Sarah's documentation, but had been pressured to move quickly. Sarah faced multiple felony charges, including fraud, forgery, and perjury. But as I watched her packing Tyler's belongings while he played obliviously on the floor, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Brian, I want to establish a trust fund for Tyler, I said during our meeting, to discuss pressing charges. Joanna, you're under no legal obligation to provide for Tyler, Brian reminded me. Sarah attempted to defraud you of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tyler is still David's nephew through Michael, I explained, and he's innocent in this situation. Sarah made terrible choices, but Tyler shouldn't suffer because his mother was desperate. I proposed a settlement that would provide for Tyler's education and health care through a trust fund managed by David's parents, while Sarah faced the legal consequences of her actions, but avoided prison time through community service and restitution. You're being more generous than she deserves, Jessica told me privately. I'm being the person David would want me to be, I replied, and the person I want to be. Sarah's mother agreed to take temporary custody of Tyler, while Sarah completed court-ordered psychological counseling and community service. The family learned the truth about Michael's relationship with Sarah and Tyler's real parentage, which brought both scandal and unexpected healing. I should have reached out to Sarah after Michael died, David's mother told me during one of our conversations. I was so focused on David's grief over losing his twin that I didn't think about whether Michael had left anyone behind. None of this is your fault, I assured her. Sarah made choices based on grief and desperation, but those were still her choices. David's parents embraced their role as Tyler's grandparents, finally able to openly love the grandchild who carried Michael's legacy. Tyler would grow up knowing the truth about his father and understanding that Michael had loved him deeply during his brief life. The legal resolution took months, but I gradually reclaimed my home and my peace of mind. Sarah's belongings disappeared. Tyler's crib was removed from the guest room, and the house slowly returned to feeling like the sanctuary David and I had created together. Jessica helped me redecorate David's office, transforming it from the nursery Sarah had envisioned into a memorial space filled with photos of David, Michael, and happier family memories. Do you think David knew? Jessica asked one evening as we arranged photos of the twin brothers. I think David knew he couldn't have children, and I think he grieved privately for the family we could never have, I replied. But I also think he loved me enough to protect me from that knowledge. Sarah and I never rebuilt a sisterly relationship, but we developed a functional coexistence centered on Tyler's well-being. She eventually completed her community service and psychological counseling, gaining insight into how grief had twisted her judgment. I convinced myself that Tyler deserved David's life because Michael never got the chance to live his, Sarah explained during one of our supervised conversations. But stealing your life wasn't going to bring Michael back. 6 months after the crisis began, I attended Tyler's actual 3rd birthday party at his grandmother's house. He was a bright, happy child who called me Aunt Joanna and showed me his toys with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. "Thank you for not hating me," Sarah said quietly, as Tyler played in the garden. "I hated what you did," I corrected. "But Tyler needs adults who can model forgiveness and accountability. Will you tell him about David when he's older?" "I'll tell him that David loved Michael very much, and that love extended to Michael's son," I replied. "Tyler will grow up knowing he was wanted and loved by his real father, even if their time together was too short." The trust fund I established would ensure Tyler's college education and provide health care throughout his childhood. David's parents visited him regularly, sharing stories about Michael and maintaining the connection to his biological father's memory. As for me, I learned that protecting my own interests didn't make me selfish, and that compassion didn't require self-sacrifice. David's memory was restored to the honorable, faithful man I had married. My home remained my sanctuary. My financial security was protected. But more importantly, I discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed. The grief that had left me vulnerable to Sarah's manipulation gradually transformed into resilience that would serve me for the rest of my life. Standing in my garden one evening, watching the sunset David and I had admired together so many times, I realized that surviving Sarah's deception had taught me something crucial. Love doesn't make us weak, but trust without wisdom can make us vulnerable. David's love had been real and faithful. Michael's love for Sarah and Tyler had been real and devoted. Sarah's love for Tyler had been real but misdirected into destructive choices. Even my love for David's memory had been real enough to fight for when threatened. The difference between love and manipulation, between vulnerability and wisdom, between compassion and self-sacrifice. These were lessons that would guide my future relationships and decisions. Tyler would grow up knowing he was loved by many people who had learned to prioritize his well-being over their own pain. Sarah would hopefully learn to rebuild her life on truth rather than deception. And I would honor David's memory by living with the integrity he had modeled throughout our marriage. Sometimes the most profound victories come not from defeating others, but from refusing to let others' choices define who we become. Asterisk. Asterisk. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone close to you betrayed your trust? How did you handle it? And what helped you move forward? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share it with someone who might find strength in hearing how we can overcome even the most devastating deceptions. Thank you for taking this emotional journey with me, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' choices, but by how you choose to respond when life tests your character.